Hey Jim, look at this plant. Isn't this stunning? This is a Datura rhytii. Isn't that the most gorgeous bloom you've ever seen?
I think in San Diego County, for our native plants, this is probably the most spectacular bloom. It can be, the width of the bloom can be bigger than the palm of
Oh
your
yeah,
hand.
it could be like that big. And sometimes it's tinged in purple, like this one's got a start of the tinge in purple.
For instance,
these are normally like nocturnal, aren't they? They come out more in the dusk.
They stay open at night.
There you go. They start like this. You see this, Ellen? Like this, and then they spin open.
or the bud.
For the bud, yeah. Then they spin open. Another name for this besides Jimson weed, which is a common name we use, is hoary thornapple or thornapple.
Sacred apple.
Sacred apple.
Sacred Datura.
Devil's apple. There's their seed pod. So the Native Americans, when it gets older, they'd use that for rattles sometimes. So this plant is so important and so interesting. First of all, it's poisonous. Now,
At the right quantity, this plant can kill.
yes, not so much to touch it, but to ingest it. So Native Americans, however, would use this plant for all kinds of things. Medicines, they use it for
Ceremonial
hallucinogens. Yes, it's
The trick about the hallucinogens is you have to get the dose just right or it'll kill you instead of hallucinate.
get the ghost dose.
The dose,
Absolutely,
how much you take,
it absolutely will kill you. So yes, they knew how to do that.
Even the king I had, every once in a while they'd lose somebody because
Yes.
plants they're not all
Well,
the same concentration of the toxin.
for the Native Americans, only the shaman were allowed to collect this
There you go.
plant, because depending on the time of year, what part of the plant you're collecting, a bunch of very subtle clues that most of us would never identify. The amount of the plant you need to be ceremonially useful changes.
Oh, I bet.
And it's a very specific amount of this for the ceremony. Anything less than that, there's no effect. Anything more than that, you could die.
Correct.
So
It's
you
a
had
kind
to be
of a bad one to be recreational with.
Oh, you don't ever.
So pretty easy.
Well, every few years you read a story of someone, usually a teenage boy or group of boys, who have heard this is a hallucinogenic plant. They take some of the leaves, they wrap them up, they smoke them,
Yes.
and they can die.
That happened when I first came to California. I had one of these up on my hillside. I'd never seen it before. Oh my God, what a beautiful plant. And then I started learning about it. And that summer that I was learning about the Datura, 2 high school boys had rolled it and smoked it and died, 2 of them in that summer, which wasn't that long ago. So yeah, it can be poisonous. However, the Chumash natives up around Santa Barbara-ish, they would use it in a ceremony. So the shamans there were hunting for good boys that would be good men for their village, right? So they would take 8-year-old boys on their vision quest, which is kind of a traditional thing that Native Americans would do. They'd take young boys on a vision quest. So in the Chumash, they would use a mixture of the Datura, the shaman. They'd have their ceremony. They'd do their dancing, their singing, and their ceremony for the vision quest for the 8-year-old boys. And then they would feed them a tincture of, I'm guessing a tea, of Datura. And if the boy survived, then he was going to be a good man for the village. If he didn't survive, bad kid, out. So the shaman never had to take the rap, right? Because
it was just
he was going to be a bad man. So, but so yeah, the natives knew how to use this. It's not for use now, that's for sure. But can you recognize this flower? Where have we seen this beautiful flower before in the art world? Georgia O'Keeffe did an entire series on the Datura rhytii. There's spectacular paintings that Georgia O'Keeffe did about using this plant. And there's another interesting story about it. In 93, Jamestown had a rebellion. This is called Jimson weed now. That's not the original name. The original common name was Jamestown weed. And in 1693, I think it's Nathan Bacon started a rebellion against the British government that was in Virginia at the time. They didn't like it, what the British government was doing, so they started rebelling. The British decided to put them down, so the British got the army getting ready to go. They're going to start the next day. That night, they were fed either a soup or a stew with some of these leaves in it for 11 days. The British army group that was going to go after the rebellion, they couldn't fight. They were blowing feathers in the air. They were rolling around naked. They were rolling in excrement. They were dancing and laughing and going crazy or sick as dogs for 11 days before that British army could get up and start doing to put the rebellion down. Bacon's Rebellion. And it's documented in 1703 by a letter from a military man.
Well, I think you can still find the governor's original notes that were written while that was going on.
Really?
And he was having a fun time.
Oh, he had some of the stew, huh?
No, he was watching effects it had. Yeah, these guys are just really messed up. You could tell he was tickled.
He thought it was pretty funny watching them.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing about this,
it's
the flower is open at night, which makes you wonder who pollinates.
Yeah, really. So this is a really big flower.
And it's a huge flower.
Huge flower. Who would do that?
Well, bees aren't flying at night.
No.
Butterflies aren't flying at night.
No.
Hummingbirds don't even fly at night. But there's one insect that we associate with the night.
I know what flies at night.
What?
Moths fly at night.
Moths fly
But they're
at night.
tiny. They're little guys.
Not the moth for this plant.
Oh, yeah?
There's a moth called the datura moth, and it's literally about the size of a hummingbird. It's
one of
big.
those great big guys. It's about, the wingspan's about that big.
It's huge. It's a beautiful moth, very subtle in color, but just a beautiful moth. And if you have the opportunity to ever watch one, it's so much fun because the moth will fly in there, it'll do its thing, it'll collect some nectar and pollen, it'll fly away, and then it'll come back.
Oh, yeah?
Because it figured that was really kind of fun. And it'll get some more pollen and nectar and fly away, but not quite as well as it did the first time. And it'll keep coming back, going away, and each time it's a little loopier. And eventually it just kind of stops in the flower. And the flower might even close around it at some point.
Oh my gosh.
And it doesn't seem to bother the moth.
That's
and it'll open back up, and the moth will fly away. A little unsteady.
Well, that was my question. How could it feed off of this? Because it's a poisonous plant. And now we know it's adapted. Evolutionarily, it's been adapted to be able to do that.
And not necessarily all parts of any plant are poison. Even the most poisonous ones may not, the leaf may not be poisonous, but maybe the root is, which is why, unless you're an expert on plants, you got to be very careful.
Yes.
And maybe you could eat the flower of this, but if you ate the leaf, you might get very sick.
I wouldn't try it on this plant. So that's an interesting question. Why does it have to be a big moth? Why can't they just get the pollen right here? Well, the thing is, they're not after anything that's pollinated isn't after the pollen. That's a benefit for the plant. They're after a nectar pod that's way down inside. So the plants make this little nectar pod. I don't know what it's scientifically called. Nectary. So they have to have, this plant, whatever pollinates it, has to have a long enough proboscis or tongue, right? That goes all the way down in there to get to that nectar pod, way down in there. And in the process, it's brushing against the pollen, which is right here. Those are the male parts, the pollen parts, right there. And then there's the female, that's the stamen. Stigma? I can't remember.
I don't have my glasses, so I'm blind.
What? Stigma. See, there's the female stigma.
The end of the pistil.
Right there, that little guy right there. And then these are the males, so the moth is brushing against those, and then he goes to another plant and goes in and he brushes it against the stigma of another plant, and that's how it's pollinated.
So we were talking about pollinator fidelity and how if you're a plant, you don't waste your pollen on an insect that then flies to the wrong plant.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example.
Yeah, how would you get a moth to go from this plant to another datura rather than something else?
Well, you make it such that, well, one, you have to have a reward.
Sure.
And you also put it somewhere where only that insect can get to it. So
way down in there.
And you open at night, so the butterfly, which also has a long proboscis,
some of them
won't be coming here. Okay. And so you've opened at night, only your other buddy Jimson weeds are open.
Brilliant.
And only this one insect that's probably been to another Jimson weed is going to come visit you.
Plants are really smart.
Plants are way smarter than we give them credit.
Darwin had a theory when he came across a trumpet flower, which is a lot like this, only it would hang down like this. What kind of an insect would pollinate that? And he decided that it would have to be something, and the trumpet flower blossom is very large, and it had like a 6-inch proboscis. So it has to be something flying, like a moth,
Oh, bat.
that has, or a bat, or something that has a 6-inch tongue, proboscis, something like that.
And then also, because it's upside down, you have to be able to hover.
There you go.
So another characteristic of your
This.
pollinator you're trying to enforce, perhaps.
There you go.
And my favorite, I mean, the flower's beautiful.
It's
but
stunning.
The best part of this
Oh, yes.
plant is if you rub the leaf here,
Oh, yes, the smell.
and then you smell it. About half of the people who do
You
this
think
will
it smells?
smell peanut butter. The other half will smell
smells-
dirty gym socks.
Yeah, that's more like what I think.
I kind
I
of
don't
get,
have the peanut butter smell.
I have a touch of peanut butter with an aftertaste of dirty
Old
gym socks.
socks.